No breakthroughs as government begins fresh lobbying over political reform. Former EXCO member and Leung Chun-ying supporter declared bankrupt. And Cuba removed from U.S. list of state sponsors of terrorism. Good evening. Thanks for joining us. The government has started to meet with lawmakers to try to win their support before unveiling its political reform package. But there's still no breakthrough yet. Both the administration and the Pan-Democrats, who oppose any proposal based on Beijing's reform framework, insist they won't budge on their stances. Diane To has our top story.
Chief Secretary for Administration Carrie Lam said she's as confident as the chief executive that the administration does have a good proposal prepared.
But I have to candidly admit that up till now, we have not secured a single vote from amongst the 27 Pan-Democratic members. But we will continue to work very hard.
Officials will continue meeting with lawmakers in the coming few days. But Lam said these meetings are only expected to last 10 to 15 minutes, as the purpose is just for her to send two messages to the legislators.
One is there is simply no room for the National People's Congress Standing Committee's decision to be retracted, to be revised, or to be reversed. So there should be no illusion that compromises or changes could be made to the MPC-SC decision.
Lam's second point is to ask lawmakers to take public opinion into full account when making their decisions on whether to support the political reform package or not. Earlier this morning, Democratic Party Chairwoman Emily Lau and lawmaker Albert Ho met with Lam. And they came out equally adamant that the government should not have any illusions about their stance.
The Democratic Party will definitely vote down a political reform package if it is strictly according to the decision of the National People's Congress Standing Committee made on the 31st of August last year.
But before making a final decision about the reform package, the Democratic Party will hold a general meeting for all members to vote on the party's direction. Civic Party's Alan Leung said the Chief Secretary called him this morning to refute media reports that the government has a name list of opposition lawmakers they plan to sway. He said he will accept a meeting with Lam to tell her face-to-face that Hong Kong people should be given a real choice of CE candidates. Federation of Trade Unions Wong Kwok Kin, who met with Lam at noon, believes the Pan-Democrats aren't really united and that it is possible for the government to get the few swing votes it needs for the reform package to be passed. Diane To, TVB News.
Meanwhile, a top Pan-Democrat says she supports a proposed referendum on the government's political reform package, but Civic Party Chairman Audrey Yu stresses the need for a two-thirds majority if that happens, which is in line with the two-thirds support needed among legislators to pass the package. Ronnie Samtani has that story.
University of Hong Kong pollster Robert Chung has proposed holding a territory-wide referendum after the government unveils its reform proposal. But Civic Party lawmaker Alan Leung said if the government and the pro-establishment camp refuse to recognize the results of the referendum, then there's no reason to hold one. Civic Party Chairman Audrey Yu told TVB she believes people are eager to express their views. Although the administration says it's not legally binding, she said the pro-democracy camp can still hold a referendum.
At the moment, I don't see the government coming up with anything other than they will follow strictly the 31st August decision. And if there are funds to carry out a referendum by Robert Chung, and provided that certain conditions can be met, like, for example, the number of people who have to come out to vote, and also the threshold's got to be agreed. It's got to be two-thirds majority. And I think if these conditions can be met, I have no objection.
She said the referendum should require two-thirds support from the public to indicate if Pan-Democrats should pocket or reject the proposal.
Hong Kong people are pretty resilient, and they know that what matters to Hong Kong are our true values, and you know, what's real universal suffrage is one of those, and that's why you see so many Hong Kong people coming out, particularly young people, to fight for real universal suffrage. And I think it's a united call, and the last thing the Pan Democrats should do is really to ignore that and do a U-turn, and that's going to demoralize and damage the democratic movement even more.
She said if the government refuses to give the public a genuine choice, it can't blame the Pan Democrats for vetoing what she calls an unreasonable package. Ronnie Samtani, TVB News.
In other news, former executive councillor Barry Jung has been declared bankrupt by the High Court. Jung, who was also the chairman of the now-defunct Hong Kong Mercantile Exchange, did not appear in court today. The bankruptcy petition was filed by director and shareholder of Sunley Holdings, Lung Chi-hong, whom Jung owed $47 million. Two other creditors also supported the petition. Jung owed one of them some $72 million. The judge granted the bankruptcy order, saying there were no grounds to oppose it. In Taiwan, Democratic Progressive Party chairwoman Tsai Ing-wen will be her party's candidate in next year's presidential election. The DPP's Central Executive Committee today endorsed Tsai's candidacy. She was the only person seeking the party's nomination. Tsai stressed the need for a government that serves the people. On cross-strait ties, she promised to work towards maintaining the status quo. Tsai was also the DPP's presidential candidate in 2012 when she lost to incumbent Ma Ying-jeou of the ruling Kuomintang. Ma is barred from running again because of term limits, and it's not clear yet who will be the KMT's candidate next year. Elsewhere tonight, Cubans are hailing U.S. President Barack Obama's decision to remove their country from a list of state sponsors of terrorism. Obama's announcement comes just days after he met with Cuban President Raul Castro at the Summit of the Americas in Panama. Alan Booknia reports.
The removal from the list clears the main obstacle to restoring diplomatic relations and reopening embassies that have been shut for more than half a century. Cubans welcomed Obama's announcement. This implies development, said this man. Progress in economic and social areas. It's great. This man was cautiously optimistic. He said it's a start, but he's waiting for trade sanctions to be lifted. Cuba was placed on the list in 1982 when it was aiding rebel movements in Africa and Latin America. But Havana long ago ceased supporting foreign insurgencies. International investors in Cuba say delisting the country would prove positive for the Caribbean islands' economy. Banks could legally do business with Cuba while it was on the list, but the regulations proved onerous. 20 banks stopped doing business with the Cuban government or Cuban interests in third countries over the past 18 months. But U.S. Republican Senator Marco Rubio, who has presidential aspirations, called Obama's decision terrible.
Cuba is a state sponsor of terrorism. They harbor fugitives of American justice, including someone who killed a police officer in New Jersey over 30 years ago. It's also the country that's helping North Korea evade weapons sanctions by the United Nations.
Congress has 45 days to consider Obama's decision before it takes effect. But lawmakers cannot stop it unless both chambers approve a joint resolution, a move regarded as highly unlikely. Alan Booknia, TVB News.
The White House has bowed to pressure and agreed to sign legislation giving Congress the right to reject any nuclear agreement with Iran. The announcement was made just before Republicans and Democrats on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee unanimously approved a compromise version of the measure. It was a sign that Congress would not back down on its insistence that lawmakers must have a say if any final deal with Iran involves the eventual lifting of sanctions. But President Barack Obama retains the right to veto the legislation if Congress tries to scuttle an emerging deal with Iran, which is set to be finalized by June 30th.
Congress stays involved, and every 90 days, the administration has to certify that in every way, Iran is in compliance. And if there are violations within a 10-day period, they have to give that to Congress so that we have the ability, if we wish, to quickly reapply the sanctions that, if a deal is approved, would be alleviated.
Now, meanwhile, Barack Obama has pledged $200 million in humanitarian aid to Iraq to help those displaced by Islamic State militants. The White House also warned that Iran-backed Shiite militias must answer to Baghdad as they help battle the extremists. Obama made the aid commitment during a meeting with Iraqi Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi in the Oval Office.
We are committing an additional $200 million in humanitarian aid to help stabilize communities and to help those who've been displaced from their homes, have lost their jobs, have seen their property destroyed.
But the aid package appeared to have fallen short of what Iraq had hoped for. Abadi had been expected to seek billions of dollars in drones and other U.S. weapons during his visit. Obama said Iraqi forces are getting better equipped and trained since Abadi's election 7 months ago, but declined to say whether Washington would provide additional arms to Baghdad. He also noted Iraq and a U.S.-led coalition have recovered about 1/4 of the territory that Islamic State militants had captured. Abadi said his government is working to bring all fighters battling militants in Iraq under the control of its armed forces. But with tens of thousands of volunteers, he admitted that unifying them will be a formidable task. Iran's involvement in the fight against militants in Iraq, a major point of concern for the U.S., was also discussed. Shiite militias backed by Iran are playing a major and growing role in helping the Iraqi military roll back militant advances in the country. But Obama warned Iran that its fighters must respect Iraq's sovereignty.
It needs to be help that is not simply coordinated with the Iraqi government, but ultimately is answerable to the Iraqi government and is funneled through the chain of command within the Iraqi government.
Abadi is on his first trip to Washington. The visit is meant to convey a U.S. stamp of approval for a leader who is seeking to be more inclusive than his predecessor in governing Iraq. Back here at home, the Consumer Council has received about 70 complaints about air ticket redemption in credit card or airline reward programs over the past 2 years. The watchdog says passengers need to pay attention to the terms and conditions of reward schemes. Liz Yoon reports.
The Consumer Council says many of the disputes relating to air ticket redemptions arose from a lack of transparency in seat availability for flights, unexpected expiration of redeemed air tickets, and service fees for the conversion of reward points into airline miles. In one case, a complainant placed his flight redemption order a year ahead of his trip to Sapporo, Japan. He was surprised to find that he was put on the waiting list, while the airline's online booking system indicated seats were still available on the flights concerned. Upon the council's mediation, the airline said that seats for mileage redemption